We are still Dialog Choices podcast against all odds.
Wow.
Hello, Andrew.
The odds are pretty bad because of us not knowing what we're going to talk about today.
That's every episode, though, except for when Bird's here, where we have a mission. Our special guest,
Bird was going to be here.
No, because we didn't have a topic.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah.
Bird will not come on the podcast if there's not a topic. And in those cases, the topic is usually Bird is the expert at this thing. Let him talk about the thing.
Yeah.
He's not ready for the aimless talk about whatever thing that this show normally is, and
just
sometimes very
having a conversation.
Yeah.
Sometimes
who the fuck does that?
Yeah, crazy.
I only talk to my friends when I can use it for content.
That is absolutely not true.
Which is why I will now talk about. That's why I'll now talk about everything I did this weekend to turn it into content.
Wait a second, I was there this weekend.
Yeah.
Oh no.
If you were wondering why there's no streams this weekend, it's because
it was my fault. Sorry.
Yeah, I went to a haunt with Andrew and Toaster, and that was Friday night, and then Saturday night I went to a furry VR chat karaoke night, and so that's where I was instead of making videos, and that was entertaining. And that's my entire weekend. So I had a weekend.
Oh my god!
So I don't normally have weekends.
Supposed to take away from, what we're supposed to take away from this is that you sing. Oh yeah, you sing. You have some videos of you singing.
Yeah, that's not unusual.
Yeah, he played Rock Band for years.
Yeah.
No, do you sing? Wait, Rock Band, right?
Yeah, you can sing in Rock Band.
Yeah, of course.
I could do everything. I could do everything on expert in Rock Band except for drums. I was on hard.
Wow.
Drums are tricky.
I just played it all the fucking time. I had 1,000 songs of DLC in Rock Band. Yeah,
my experience with Rock Band was similar to that, except I just didn't do singing, and I could do drums on expert, but I couldn't do anything else on expert. I was like, this is easier because the buttons are bigger. They're exactly
each
other.
I can't miss them.
Wow. Oh, you can though. That's the problem.
No, I just the pedal. The pedal just broke my brain. It also is just a huge pain in the ass to set up the drum set for Rock Band and have space for it.
Yeah.
So I just had less time with it in general, and just kind of would frustrate me and wear me out compared to, like, I was already onboarded in Guitar Hero 2 and 3 before Rock Band came out to play guitar and bass. And singing, I just can do. It's not very hard.
Well,
wow, way to show off.
It is very hard if you don't have practice.
I mean, I went to expert very quickly in Rock Band.
I can only
as far as pitch shifting. It's where I picked up the skill of being able to jump octaves but match the pitch still, because that's the primary thing that you get trained in Rock Band for. Because what happens is you have all these fucking songs like not My Name Is Jonas. What's it called? Say It Ain't So. By Weezer. I said the Weezer.
The Weezer.
There's all these. Well, you remember that song, right, Andrew? Say It Ain't So. Like it has all of those lines where he keeps going lower. Especially like each line ends with him going lower, and
because you run out of.
If you already have a low voice and you're singing based on the what he sounds like, you'll like try to go lower, and you're like, either my voice can't go lower or I can't project enough while trying to go lower to pick up on the microphone. Like, you would just watch the arrow disappear and you're like, fuck, how do I no? And you realize, so you pick up the talent of being able to jump up or down an octave to do certain lines in your range and figure out how to make them work. And I picked that up really quickly, so it was never very difficult. For me, the challenge was that there's some songs where the harmonies are more memorable than the lead singer that they're mapping to, and so you inherently try to like sing to the version of the vocals you remember, but there's like 2 or 3 singers, and the one you're thinking of isn't the one that the line's following, and so you have that'll fuck you up on Pixie songs a lot.
I never even thought about that. That's a weird nightmare to.
Singing is fun and dumb, but yeah, my weekend was I recorded 5 hours of Zelda, then drove to Sacramento area to hang out with Toaster and Andrew and do a bunch of haunts. Then stayed overnight at Toaster's house because we went to Denny's.
Oh my god,
bro!
We went to Denny's because there was like there was this feeling. Well, you know, we met up for a thing that's 1 hour long, and especially in my case, it's almost 2 hours of driving each way. So there's like an inherent feeling of getting more out of it. But even then, like we stood around in the parking lot and talked for like an hour after the thing. And then we went to Denny's and waited an hour to get served, and then ate bad food because that's what the only option. That's the whole menu of Denny's. That's just you just ask for the bad thing, and you're like, I would like the bad thing. Toaster planted it in my brain that we should go somewhere and get shitty shakes, and so I got a shake when I was there, and then I was just laying in bed in Toaster's spare room, and I'm like, this was a mistake because
shitty food or the shake?
The shake, because I'm like I was up till 4 a.m. just laying in bed. I'm like, I'm not gonna be able to go to sleep until this is like done with, and I didn't plan ahead, so I didn't have melatonin or anything on me, or like or change of clothes or any other options, because I figured, oh, it's this thing's like 9 to 10. I'll just come home and be home at midnight.
I told you to pack an overnight bag.
Yeah, I know. And I thought about it, and then I was like, "That's dumb. I'm probably gonna be home. I'm probably gonna be home by either midnight or 1. So, or it's fine." But then we didn't.
And it wasn't.
So I pretty much like was asleep finally from like 4 to 10 or something, and I felt like trash all day, and drove home, and freaking just did some tiny amount of stuff I could get done before going to East Coast furry karaoke night. So their evening starts at my 5.
So what's wild about this though is that Keith goes to this furry night, and I go to our local Sacramento furry meet. And at the Sacramento furry meet, I overhear someone saying, "Yeah, I skipped VR karaoke to come here." Yeah, me too. And then they were like, "What else did you do today?" And they were like, "I watched Boring Keith's new video." And I was like, "What?" And then I looked at them and I was like, Boring Keith was good. Like, he could have come here. He came to the last one. I was in that video. That's cool. He's doing karaoke with like you know, George and Paint Fox and Horror Buns and stuff. And they were like, "Oh my god, we skipped that to come here, and he skipped this to go there." And I was like, well, "Yeah, I guess so." Near miss.
Yeah, because there's an event called Roar that's at the Bear Bar or whatever it's called.
Yeah, Bear Dive
Bar and in Sacramento. And I went last time, but this time it was like I keep missing out on this karaoke thing, partly because it's like the same night that we do the stream. I thought it was during the stream because I kept hearing 7, but it was 7 for them, so it's like Central or something. So I made the time to go there this time because I think next week I'll be at the convention, and I'm like, I keep getting FOMO about this thing. So I went, and yeah, like it was eventful. George and Paint Fox weren't there. I think Paint Fox has been there before. I don't know if George ever has, but there's Horror Buns, the creator of Claw Star Wrestling. There was Jericho, the creator of Remember the Flowers. I spotted Rami, the creator of Shelter, but he kind of came and went. And I spent a decent chunk of the time just talking with the programmer, the writer, and the artist, all 3 of them that made Before You Depart for a chunk of the night. That was just... It's entertaining. They have a VR... What happens is they have a screen where you select songs, but via this awkward search interface and so on the right side of the stage. On the left side of the stage is a list of the songs that are queued up right now, and you can only queue up 1 for yourself. So you just put a new one in each time you get in, and that's how it keeps the rotation going. And because it's VR chat, it's got superpowers. It's the karaoke stage becomes this like cosmic horror entity that has power over everyone in the room and controls things, and you cannot stop it. Like it's very entertaining that it's just this immutable force that cannot be reasoned with once it starts moving. So you're all in a room that has a stage and a bunch of seating, and people like wander off and form circles and chat with each other, and then go hang out by the stage and watch the singer and whatever they're feeling like at the moment. But every time a song ends and the next one starts, the stage doors close. They're not curtains. It's like Japanese like paper doors, and as the doors are closed, the singer appears. The person that was singing appears back in the room. The person who's next in the queue, whether they're aware or not, just disappears and appears on stage alone behind the closed door, and then it just opens to unveil everyone looking at you and the stage at the screen with the lyrics and stuff, and it just goes. Like, there is no like warning it's starting. You just if there's 3 pages of queued songs and you forget what you put in and stop looking to see when you're gonna come up, you're just suddenly on a stage. And you're like, fuck.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a real VR that's a real karaoke experience at that point.
It's very amusing. Like, it works that way.
So it's called skill gap. It's people who can tell when it's about to happen and people who can't.
That sounds about normal at least from my experience of doing karaoke.
I've never been to a karaoke thing.
Really? That's my first time doing karaoke.
I've been to it twice, but I think the first time I went, I didn't sing because I wasn't confident. Like, I didn't. Well, okay. First of all, it was the first time I had ever gone to karaoke. It was in Japan at a karaoke bar, which is fucking loud.
Oh yeah,
like it's incredibly loud. So there's almost this like, I don't know, paralyzation of like, do I want to be that fucking loud? Like, do I really want to sing that loudly? And also the third was like, I wasn't confident I could sing any of the stuff on the list. Like everything on the list was like all the English songs I was like, I don't know these. And all the Japanese songs I was like, I can't sing in Japanese. So like it was just like what am I?
That was one of my takeaways was that a shocking number of people could sing in Japanese at this.
Yeah.
Singing in Japanese is like, how can you not, Andrew?
Because I don't.
What do you mean?
Sing,
how can you not?
Because I don't sing the openings of anime songs.
I can sing in Japanese. Yeah, and I don't watch anime anymore.
I don't. I
have cheat codes in Portuguese.
I can't sing in Japanese.
The sounds are all the same.
If I could sing in Japanese, I would have done Wild Side.
It's again, it is more of the fact that I do not have the lyrics of the songs memorized, and I'm not going to try and read Japanese while I'm on a stage.
Because I don't have the romanji. I can do that without romanji.
Yeah, so like the problem is it just wasn't a good time. But the second time I went was very like, it felt like a battle royale type thing. Like as soon as the song ended, boom, next song. But you can't see who was playing. You can't see what song's coming up next. You just have to like hear. Basically, it does like a brief couple of seconds where it plays like the beginning of a song extra long, and that is like your indication. Like, oh yeah, I picked that song. That's the song I picked. Like nightmare. It was a terrifying experience. Plus,
on the one hand, I can't blame you for being intimidated by singing karaoke in the land of karaoke. But on the other hand, I can't believe you wouldn't sing karaoke in the land of karaoke.
Wow.
I mean, if next time I go, I will definitely
Andrew's
do it,
on trial.
Yeah.
In Japan, I mean, the big thing is like doing box karaoke and not bar karaoke. Like bar karaoke in Japan is actually like not as popular as like just renting a private room for yourself and your friends.
Yeah, that's what we did. Yeah, we just did like a private room. And that's just it's a different experience. It's a different experience.
That's the best way to do it. I love it.
Really? I feel like for me, I'm the opposite. I prefer the in front of random strangers approach because I feel like the judgment level is a lot less because like everyone in that room sucks. But there is the only thing I hate about it is that some people don't understand how to do karaoke, and not in the way of like they're bad at like singing or any of the singing part. It's like the choices in music. Like it's really important to like, I don't know, keep a mood with karaoke. It's like
it's the vibes factor.
Yeah, like the vibes. Like people are really bad. Sometimes are really bad at keeping the vibes of karaoke. Like when you're sitting there and you're talking with people and whatever, you don't want to be listening to music that is like sad and depressing. Like you don't want that. No, I mean even Yakuza, I don't want that. Like I don't want sad. Like if I'm trying to talk to somebody, and so like when the second time I went to karaoke,
I sang a sad song.
Like that. Why? Why would you sing a sad song at a fun event?
I sang sometime
That's
around
super
midnight.
common. That's normal.
Yeah,
No,
I sang.
it's very rude.
I sang sometime around midnight by Airborne Toxic Event. I also did the other one was sad but upbeat sounding in that it was feel good drag by Anne Berlin, because I listened to so much weepy alternative music in the aughts. And then
and again,
then I picked it up with I did Inside Out by Eve 6, and I did A Man's Gotta Do from Dr. Horrible, which so I didn't know how this worked. I thought this was a relatively standardized thing, but what it's actually doing is pulling YouTube videos from karaoke channels. So each one of these ones has a different format. And when I did A Man's Gotta Do, I was on stage alone, and it started showing all three voices in no particular order. Because eventually that song it starts off as Neil Patrick Harris, it becomes Nathan Fillion, and then there's a bit of Felicia Day, and then for the final fourth, it's all three of them at once harmonizing while singing different lyrics, because because the entirety of Dr. Horrible is insane, and it's very entertaining the way those songs work with the layered vocals with completely different lyrics and everything. But having all three parts show up on stage at once and having to parse what the fuck you're looking at is so paralyzing that I just lost my mind.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Stressful.
Yeah.
That was amusing. Also, Inside Out is too fast of a song for karaoke. It's just it's one thing when you're playing Rock Band and you're hearing the real song in its entirety with full audio, and you can tell exactly what the timing is. And also Rock Band itself has a very consistent scrolling vocal track, so you know the timing of all the words, and you can see the little lines that indicate when they happen and what their pitches and so on are. Karaoke's interface is chaos, and it's hard to hear the weird, like, off-brand shitty version of the song that you're playing, so it gets really confusing to try to tell what the timing is for Inside Out when you're like in a loud echoey room essentially, and you can't hear the song, and the every single line is playing at a different speed, and you have no sense of like the pacing and timing of what's happening right now. That was a disaster. Don't do that.
The experience of your in-ear monitors failing when you're on stage, which happened to me. But I played the guitar, so who cares? I can hear the drums.
The furry karaoke is just like normal karaoke, except a bunch of people are stepping on each other.
Wait,
Okay.
what's the why?
There's just a bunch of people in full-scale VR, and they're just like fooling around, just like. You got people dancing together. You got people you'll have like someone laying on the floor and people stepping on them. You'll have people like to take advantage of the scale change that's now universally implemented in VR chat, where you can change your size no matter what, basically. So you have people that are like bulging into the ceiling and crouching down to fit in the room, and then you have other people that are like standing on like dressers because they're like 3 inches tall, and they're getting the Honey I Shrunk the Kids perspective of the room.
That's the best perspective.
There's just chaos happening around the room throughout, and then every now and then, like 10 people wander off to around the corner to the bed. What are you guys up to over there? And then you just get summoned by the fucking karaoke god, and you're forced to do a song.
Nice.
Then the night before we did The Haunt, that was an experience. It was 4 rooms with lines leading up to them. The first one was definitely the worst one, so I can see why it had the least line.
You didn't like the Deadlands?
No, Deadlands was pretty bad. It was there was some really cool animatronic things, like the guy that's hanging from the ceiling by his entrails and freaks out. Like a lot of the animatronics were pretty cool, and they'd usually have a strobe light in the room with them to hide the roboticness of their movements, and it just made them look more fucked up and real and like off-putting.
Yeah.
These poor actors have a tough time figuring out how to react to people, because like they're like trusting everyone to collectively maintain an etiquette of moving in small groups and staying together in those groups and so on.
Yeah.
And so they keep like trying to react and then reset and so on and say like their some character lines and so on. There's that one that we did with the witch one where they clumped us into a group of 10 of like 10 with like 3 other people or whatever. Like they're trying to like build up a group. But that doesn't work because immediately the people that aren't part of our social group will just split off. And so that now the actors are just in chaos mode because no one's moving together. Like they don't like these people. It's been really never explained out loud to people, but they don't seem to intuit the fact that the reason you're in groups is because the stuff has a timing, and so you need to stay together to have the scares work and so on.
I mean, the reality of haunted houses is just that every single time you go to them, even at high production value places, even at places where they're grouping you up, like you will miss scares. Like it's fine. It's just that's the nature of funneling people through these houses. So I think it's a little bit of a lost cause, like trying to get us to be together anyway, because it's like there's no way to get everyone in a room in time for a queue every single time.
But for the middle two, which were also the best two, the choice was made to put me and Andrew in the front.
I don't like those choices.
And specifically, Andrew was forced to just lead the group. And at one point,
I'm not very good at scary situations.
Yeah, and at one point I betrayed him. Where when the mine was at its darkest, I just grabbed him. Which should be a tell, honestly, because the actors can't grab you.
Yeah. Well, it's not about the reality. It's about the suddenness of a sense that you're deprived of, right? Like nothing touches you. You can't hear anything and see anything. It's mostly just like you can only hear, right? You can just hear like people and the sound effects and screams, but every other sense is like devoid of anything. So it tries to mess with those senses. It sprays water on you, like
they just hang a bunch of strings from the ceiling that you have to walk through. That just upsetting. Like you can't see them and you can feel them on your face. I kept making a little house over my face with my hands. I would just make a little house with my hands, like a little point, and hold it like ahead of my head, like a baseball cap visor, and that was just keeping them off my face. I just hated those parts. I'm like, I'm not walking through these with my face. They're covered in COVID.
And so like exactly. So the reaction of like having someone touch you or something touch you is like like what is
the mine one was fun because it was this it took place in didn't take place in a basement, it took place in a mine, but it was built in a basement, so it actually was protected from light pollution and starlight or anything like that, so it just was pitch black in there except for when they felt like having light. And so you're just trying to navigate a bunch of weird jagged shaped hallways and trying to figure out where the hell to go half the time, and just that experience crossed with some surprise visuals and audio. And at one point a train came at you.
I think it was supposed to be a mine car is what was supposed to be coming at you, but they just had to make a sound effect. So
you get the light and steam whistle flashing at you when you were in pitch black a second ago and all that. There's some fun use of like fucked up uneven ground that they have to walk on and just not feel right throughout. At one point, there was just this bizarre structure we couldn't make sense of because we had a dead end, and there was like a sloping, membranous, like hanging tarp thing that we couldn't tell if we had to just push past it like a Japanese doorway, like at a restaurant or whatever, or if it was like you had to crouch under it, or like we couldn't make sense of the shape of it.
You guys made this into
dark.
It was way literally more pitch black thing than
we couldn't see anything, so we couldn't tell what we were supposed to do to continue.
There was a big sign with a light on it right before this that said low clearance, and then you walk and there's a tarp hanging that has a fan blowing behind it to make it seem like it's a cavern that's down, but you just crouch and you crouch under it, and then it's not gonna crush you. You can push the tarp up if you need to. But
I know, but I don't want to get on my hands and knees and crawl in the dark through a crawl space.
That's what it's designed for.
It's upsetting,
fine.
especially since it wasn't just dark. It was literally I couldn't see the shape of the space. Like I crawled face first into a wall at the end because I couldn't. It was literally you can't see anything. That was brutal. But I kept getting fucking Halloween slime bukkake the entire time. I perfectly centered myself on every single like spray trap, and so I just had like moisture running down the back of my shirt and like random chunks of wet in my hair and so on. It just like it just felt gross. I was getting targeted directly.
They might be able to because they have infrared cameras on you all the time, right? Or is it all?
I don't think these things are aiming.
Oh, okay.
I think they're just motion sensors that go off to play noises or shoot air or water at you at certain times to fuck with people. Because those are like the only way. Those are like the ways you can touch people without touching them, because you're not allowed to touch them. Because even if you could touch people, you probably wouldn't want to, because there's like there's like a safety risk for everyone involved. So like if you start making people flip out, they might swing.
Form.
Yeah, like I've heard about like people, like actors getting swung at and stuff at haunts. That'd be bad. There's a lot of children. There's a lot of children actors being little nightmare gremlins. Just
children actors or children players?
There were like there were like a handful of children actors, and I was like, wait a second, are you supposed to be here? It's like, is that legal?
Yeah, there was way more children there than expected.
Yeah.
Didn't you say it's like a volunteer thing for a church or something?
No, not
for the community.
Church. It's for the community. It's in an abandoned church, so it takes place in a church that I assume either moved in. I think it was the church that moved into the mega church they built like a little down the road, because there's like a fucking city, like a baseball stadium or a football stadium sized church further down the road. It's fucking ugly and ginormous, but I think that church, because like it was also a huge church, I think that was also used for that one prior. Yeah,
because I was gonna say like the kids probably aren't technically labor; they're just fucking around.
It's more of the time. Like I know the park closed at like
it's
10
too
or
late.
whatever.
These kids can't be up still. It's 10 p.m.
Well, like working that late seems almost like, even if it's not technically legal work, it's still.
They might be rotating them out anyway.
You say that, but why are you assuming that? Labor laws or something?
No, I'm just saying
are something.
You probably.
I mean, this wouldn't qualify for labor laws. This is volunteering.
I'm just saying they don't seem massively organized. I figure like this is probably just these people are going to be just every individual person probably is like I can be around from like 7 to 8 or whatever, and like you just have like a variety of whoever's showing up.
I can be around 7 to 8, but I have to bring my kid with me. Is that okay?
Well, I mean like including the kids, like they'd probably just have like a range of when they were going to show up. I don't imagine anyone can make them stay. So
my mom said I have to be home at 10.
You just show up for an event. And
did you take the light rail to get there?
The kids are probably having fun. I don't think the
it's
kids got there on their
kids'
own.
Parents
You're making strange leaps.
Yeah.
They could have taken the bus.
No, I think these kids just wandered around the parking lot. They just picked them up.
Oh, you seem to think that the United States has public transport.
No, I watch some YouTube channels.
Hey, you can't say that. There was literally public transit right next to it. There was a public transit into it. Yeah, there was. I think the station was like a 10 or 15-minute walk up from where it was.
That's not right next to it, though. That your standards. I mean,
that's reasonable considering most places don't even have it within like 30 to 40-minute walking.
That's fair.
Like a bus stop sometimes is like, there's a bus stop? Because you just don't know where the hell you would find it in like the deep suburbia crawl. You would just be like, isn't it? It has to be on a main street connected to like business. So, yeah. Either way, it was a good location with a lot of parking, but for some reason, not a lot of. It did not feel like as many people as there were cars. Like it almost felt like too many cars.
The place didn't seem super crowded, but the parking lot was both huge and completely full. Like obnoxiously full. I didn't know
Maybe
there
they
was
were
a.
hiding the people.
I didn't know there was a third parking lot. Like there was one coming in on the right that was tiny and obviously not obviously full, so I didn't even try looking at that one. And then there was one on the left. I didn't know you could keep going and find another one to the left because all the signs pointing that direction said exit. So I'm like, that must be the exit. So at one point I looped like 3 times through the second parking lot, not finding a place to park. And at one point I thought I saw that there was like this middle island with trees and stuff, and that around behind it there was a line of people parked there. And so I'm like, how do you get there? And I'm like, I made a mistake of driving past these white poles that are meant to stop you because I thought it would loop around to that spot that people seem to be parking. But it didn't. There was a surprise line of cars directly in my way, facing me. And so then I was stuck in like this like little hornet, like trumpet shaped, like straight linear endpoint that had just enough range at the end of it to taunt me into trying to figure out how to do a 75-point turn. But that was not in the cards. So I then had to straighten myself back out and just back all the way through the entire lane that I'd come down, all the way back through, having to thread the needle back through the poles that you barely fit through. So that was just a dumb moment out of desperation, but the clock was ticking where I was like, oh fuck, I was supposed to be early for this thing, and I'm quickly becoming not early at all for this thing. And I was trying to get there and not be the person that like fucks this up, even though when I arrived it was quickly apparent this was way more of a loose thing that you just kind of like, they're just kind of like getting people to vaguely show up at this hour so that people don't all show up at the same time, and there is no actual like appointment. I didn't know if a haunt was like, when you talk about getting in and doing all the rooms, I didn't know if there was like a tour guide person like controls your group and like shepherds them through all the things on a schedule and then kicks you out. So I thought I was going to be late for something that was important because this is a weekend of my this is my first haunt and my first karaoke in 2 days. I've been to haunted houses, but that like just ones where you just show up to a single thing and then you go in and then you're out and there's just a line. like a theme park ride. I've never been to like an organized event like this that has something resembling a schedule, so I didn't know what was going to happen. But yeah, parking sucked. Good story. I'm talking about park. Somebody save me.
I'm sorry, my idea was just to talk about Baldur's Gate 3, and so I didn't go to a haunted house.
You need to do the homework.
I didn't do the homework. And you're all still at the beginning. You're still baby Baldur's Gate 3 players.
Yeah. We started late.
It's D&D. It's a good one.
It is the best game. It's just incredible how best game it is. Like, Outer Wilds is the game, right? It's the video game. And I think everybody should play Outer Wilds, but it's still not, it's like an acquired taste after, because some people are looking for different things in video games. Like, maybe people like action, maybe people like strategy, or they like multiple different characters, and that's the sort of stuff that video games offer a lot. And so if you're looking for a game, and somebody tells you, "Hey, we'll play Outer Wilds," you're not gonna find that in Outer Wilds. You're just gonna find this completely new experience. Well, it's not completely new, but this puzzle exploration adventure thing that's touching and beautiful at the same time, and it's surprising and all that. So it's an experience in and of itself. Baldur's Gate is a known quantity. Whenever people talk, "Hey, tell me about a good RPG." Obviously, I have all the good old RPGs that I like, and newer RPGs. There are a few that are good, but Baldur's Gate is just that. It's just like, yeah, just you like strategy, you like role playing, you like stories. Go for it. Yeah, absolutely. And I am baffled every time I play. Every day I play the game, or even when I don't, I just like think to myself, it's incredible that we have Baldur's Gate 3. It's just so good.
Yeah.
And like,
we've got to have a podcast with Bird about it, where we dig into how much of a miserable time he's had with the game.
Yeah, that's the thing, though. It's the other side of
the problem is just that we can't be in a conversation where he talks about anything yet because we haven't seen anything yet. We're not in. We haven't done anything yet, so I can't do that yet. But I'm just so curious. Okay, like he's not filming it, so I don't know what kind of nightmare things are happening. But it's just like it's just falling apart for him. He's just having a terrible time.
From what he said, he's just encountering the shortcomings of role-playing games as they are in the computer space. The things like, it's just there's surprises that are popped up on you. There's missions that you're not going to be able to complete because you fucked up and you didn't mean to. Like, I'm a very strong proponent of save scum just to make your experience as tailored to you as possible. And when I say save scum, I mean, saving the game a lot and being ready to reload when you don't like the results. And just be honest with yourself as you play. Like, I'm not saying like some people will like, oh, I failed that roll, I'll reload. Sure, that's fine as well. If you like that sort of experience, 100% go for it, because that's the player in control, and I think that that's an important thing. But that's like cheating, right? It's if you fail a roll, because in Baldur's Gate, so for those people who are not aware of this game, please go play Baldur's Gate 3. It's amazing. But if you don't know, if you haven't played, basically in Dialog or outside, you are like in a tabletop role-playing session, you're told to roll a d20 and add to that your bonuses or whatever you may have on the relevant checks. Like somebody is trying to intimidate you, or you're trying to intimidate somebody. You roll intimidation, so you roll a d20. That's a 20-sided die, and you add your intimidation bonus, which could be like 2. So yeah, so you get like 15, right? But the difficulty class for the check was actually 20, so it was a very difficult check. So 15 doesn't pass. You can just reload the save that you did. And I know some people are doing that, but that that's cheating, right? It's fine in my opinion, but it is still cheating. But other things like, imagine you went on a quest to save this girl and you arrive there, you sort of fuck around looting the place after you see the girl, and it's just like, I'm looting all these boxes here for like a minute, and then when you look at the girl, she's dead because somebody came up to her and killed her. And like, oh, that sucks. Baldur's Gate is a very good game that kind of rewards you rolling with the punches, but if you don't like that, reload, go for it. I don't see any value in being like, oh, if I knew what was going to happen, I wouldn't make that choice, but I'm still going to live with the consequences. Like, personally, I don't think that's, if you don't like that, reload. And I think that's what Bird was talking about, some of his troubles. Obviously, we will have to have a chat with it about it, and we should.
Yeah.
I think apart from Bird, we all will finish the game. So in a year or so.
What? Is Bird
2.
not finishing it?
Yeah, I think he stopped. At least last time I heard him talk about it.
Bounced off. The thing that stood out to me is he said that his standard of quality is that he wouldn't stand for anything that happens in the game that he wouldn't accept happening in a tabletop group. And I'm like, that's unhinged. Because
that's too much to ask.
Inherently a tabletop group, you're just with a group of people you can just talk to. And so when you're trying to figure out how a scene would work or logic, like that's inherently the impossible. Like,
yeah.
Whenever I talk about how wild RPGs are as a concept, like the fact that people keep trying to make video games out of them, it's the fact that I keep framing them as like, yeah, they're essentially chasing D&D, which is an impossible standard that they will literally never meet, and that's why it's kind of a brilliant, beautiful genre. Is it's a series of doomed projects that will never accomplish the thing that they're essentially trying to do. It's always a weird, rudimentary series of dialogue trees and NPC hostility systems to try to recreate the idea of role-playing with a system that reacts to you. Like, it's always infinitely primitive compared to the things you can just make up in the actual tabletop RPG experience. So, like, I'm like, that is not a standard you can go in expecting of Baldur's Gate 3, because it's a standard that no RPG has ever met. The idea that they'd be able to do that ever.
I think Baldur's Gate gets the closest, but also in many ways it's not. There's limitations. Like, for example, there's one companion. There's no need to talk about specifics, but imagine you have a storyline of one companion that tells you, "Hey, I have this thing going on with me," and it's just it's tough for me. Like I'm and you're like, "Oh, I want to help," and they just tell you not to, right? And then the game doesn't give you any options to ask anything other than that. Other than the conversation you just had, you can't bring up the subject at all. That's not something that happens in tabletop. You can definitely interact beyond the sort of predefined by the DM, right? But in a video game, there's pacing concerns. There's like a plot line later on, right?
that's even a frustrating element of like even classic, especially classic RPGs, is that like the NPCs, which you inherently want to see as being your like adventuring party of developed characters that are reactive and interesting and have this depth, and like, oh, how would they react to that and how would they deal with that? So many of them in the history of games join the party and then just follow you silently for 60 hours. And any and you prod them periodically, like, do they have new dialogue? Can I check them out? And it's still the same menu as if nothing has changed in the last 30 hours. Like, huh, okay. The characters reacting and developing is like the core to some extent.
I mean, I'm kind of the mind here that like there are impossible standards on both sides that I think people don't realistically like understand when they're framing things like this as well, where it's like, one, video games are a conversation between the player and the designer. They're literally defined by rules. That's the whole point. And I don't mean rules like system rules. I mean like, in order to activate this quest, this character needs to see this event. Like, that's how games work. And the most interesting games, even things like, it's funny that you make this comparison, Colonel, where you're like, Outer Wilds is this kind of game, but Baldur's Gate 3 is this kind of game. I actually think they're pretty much the same kind of game. They're both functioning on the concept of like setting up interesting things in the world that are trailheads for reveals or context that changes your perspective of how you interact and how you engage with the game. So from like a design standpoint, like stuff like Outer Wilds, Inscription, and Baldur's Gate 3 are all really, really similar.
I see what you mean. Yeah.
But like the way that people talk about this, they're like, oh, Baldur's Gate 3, it's like a tabletop game. Tabletop isn't limited like video games. You can do whatever you want. But like, I think when people say that, they haven't actually played tabletop. Because tabletop stuff, like, yes, you do have the freedom of asking a NPC something, and like you get the magic of improv, which isn't functional in a video game because video games can't improvise. They are hard coded. But like, if we're playing Cape Escape with Ka and I'm like, hey, Ka, I want to ask Mikey about what his favorite flavor of Skittles are. And there's an enemy that's trying to eat us at the same time. It's like, can I do that? Yes. What will it result in? My character dying or Mikey going, I don't think it's time to talk about that right now. That's literally the same thing as going to an NPC and being like, I want to talk to them about this MacGuffin I found. Oh, I guess I can't. You know, like there's no actual functional difference there. It's just the perception of the rules.
I don't think I buy that argument because that's like an incredibly contrived scenario you had to walk into to make that like a comparable thing. Because you can't just ask an NPC about anything in a tabletop RPG. They might not have like an interesting answer, but they will have like infinitely more stuff they actually can talk about than like whatever a game designer pre-programmed into a thing.
Yes. But what I'm saying is that the end result of a player interaction in a video game like Baldur's Gate 3 and the reasonable extent of what a DM can do and how impactful that can be on the campaign are not actually so far removed from each other. Because there were multiple times, even in Cape Escape, Ka's an amazing DM who was great improv abilities, and we improv'd a ton of shit that wasn't planned. And yes, you can do things that aren't planned in tabletop. We're also doing a somewhat constrained kind of planned thing that has bespoke assets, and everyone's trying to respect that worry. Whereas a lot of tabletop can exist in a completely imaginary theater void and a grid that you happen to have on a whiteboard, and that's just the extent of the visuals. So you can just go, and it's an ongoing like trope and joke that like, oh well, they romanced the villain. Now he's a part of the party, or they were supposed to go on a globe spanning adventure, but they really wanted to open a bakery, so now we're in our bakery arc. Like that is genuinely a level of freedom that tabletop RPG do have. Like I don't find them very comparable.
But it's
that,
not.
I agree
not everybody
that's a
plays
thing.
like that, though.
But my point is also like whenever we hear stories about like, yeah, my party wanted to romance the villain, so we romanced the villain, and now they run a bakery on a cute little town, and it's like that can happen, but one, most DMs can't account for that. Two, most of the time, those games aren't interesting. Like, if you actually were to play through that game, there isn't really anything happening. And those types of groups peter out really quickly because they're not actually, there's nothing happening. They're not enjoyable games, and the limits of the systems become really clear when all of a sudden you're brushing up against LOL random cheese XD players who are like, well, I'm not gonna, the villain wants to kill me, I'm gonna give him a hug. It's like,
sure, but
that's
I think
not
you're arguing
enjoyable.
against the specific example and not the point, which is that
Well,
like it's the fact that the stuff can go off and go off the rails, and like there's plenty of really good campaigns where the trajectory is completely unexpected.
Yes.
Like the equivalent of like when you deliver the MacGuffin to the villain, and then you're like, you know what? We're planning a heist. We're going to steal that from him now. Like that's not an uncompelling narrative to go on, but it is extremely off the rails.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that that's still like when I'm talking about with Baldur's Gate 3 isn't like you have ultimate unlimited freedom to do what you want. Like, of course that's not the case. That's a thing with a video game. But when people talk about the unlimited freedom of tabletop, I think it's a very pie in the sky idealistic thing that pragmatically isn't actually that coherent or apparent in most tabletop settings. I've played a lot of tabletop in my life. I've played a lot of improvised tabletop. I've played games where games go off the rails. This is all possible, yes, and it happens very frequently, yes. A lot of DMs do not plan for the exact campaign that ends up playing. That is a higher degree of freedom than what most video games allow. What I'm saying, though, is that the actual degree of freedom that most players will ever take advantage of in a game like Baldur's Gate 3 is around the same degree of freedom that most people will ever take advantage of in a tabletop setting.
Yes.
The bounds of these things are not actually
happening. Yes. It's the example of how like 85% of Mass Effect people play a Paragon Shepherd with a default appearance. Like it's the idea that when you make these video games, what the inherent shaping of what verbs and what outcomes they put in the game are built around likely player behaviors.
Yes, sure. But even going from there, I'm saying I watch people talk about how their campaign is so wacky and is impossible to do in a video game form. And then I play Baldur's Gate 3 and I'm like, actually, you can do this. It just doesn't play out as fancifully as your improv allows because improv has more flavor text that isn't actually mechanical. And Baldur's Gate 3 just plays things relatively straight.
And sometimes you have to load a save 75 times in a row because you're trying to shove somebody off of a cliff, and it just why isn't it working? Why can't I just shove her off the cliff? She's right there. Like what is happening?
Exactly.
The jank just happens at you sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, and it's just, I guess what I'm saying in all of this ultimately is when I think people often mythologize the tabletop experience and then nitpick games, especially centered around tabletop, as like not living up to that experience when it's like, bro, I know you just want to play like a super high level battle master fighter, 3 levels in rogue, wizard, sorcerer, ninja, ranger who dual wields weapons. Like I understand that when most people are complaining about not having freedom, they're just complaining about the fact that there is a system of rules telling them no, which is very different than the actual level of freedom that a tabletop would reasonably allow in a setting or a campaign.
For me, it's more like the lack of choice, or specifically, there are choices that exist that lead to these outcomes, and if you want the narrative to go in a specific direction, there is technically a point in the flow chart where that exists, but you don't know if it's ahead of you or behind you, if the choice is visible, or you need to, or you can't tell which specific moment is the branch that creates that choice, and so on. It's like I had versions of this with both Fallout 4 and Tyranny, where there are massive branches about. Those games are all about having these very divergent endings with these specific factions. That's what they're built around.
Yeah.
But each of those branches happens at exactly one specific dialogue choice, and that's the only time. And whether or not that moment is the moment where it makes sense for you to rebel or go against something is not built into that choice. So like you will make a choice in a tabletop RPG, and we frequently do, where it feels thematically resonant and emotionally resonant for your character to be making this different choice. And that's frequently not when the choice exists in RPGs, to the point where like I always think about like how just the bizarre,
you have to like sit on things in games in
like,
order
I think
to
about,
make things happen.
Like I think about the bizarre writing of Fallout 4, where, spoilers for Fallout 4, I guess, you've, in that game, your son's kidnapped, then you find your son, and he's the leader of the Institute because he's an old man now and all this time has passed, and that's what's happened in Fallout 4. So you inherently have an emotional reason to be, at least you're supposed to. They're betting on that you care about your son, who's not a character until now, so you don't know them, but he's your character's son, who you totally roleplay should care about. So you have an invested reason to see this Institute thing out and figure out if you can reach him, or if you can talk to him, or if you can like find some kind of common ground. And bizarrely, they let you roam the Institute, and you can find computers that have a bunch of reports about fucked up stuff they're up to. And none of those reports spawn the trigger for you being able to confront him about the things you're finding. Then you get sent on a series of linear missions where you have no choices, where you have to do increasingly fucked up things for the Institute, like up to and eventually being a kidnapping. You have to kidnap for the Institute, the exact thing that I just read documents about that I wanted to confront him about. It's like, what the fuck? You're kidnapping people? What's going on, Institute people? You're my son. Why can't I talk to my son about him kidnapping people? So I get to the kidnapping mission, and I see there's no dialogue options to opt out of the mission. There's no moment to protest against the mission. You can't try to resolve the situation in a way where you're like, that's it. No, I'm running this specific operation. We're going against orders, and I'm going to face the consequences. I'm going to talk to my son about this when I get home or something. It's like, no. You either just go through the kidnapping, or you do what I do, which is you shoot the kidnapper, in which case it does what every Bethesda Fallout game does, which is you instantly fail out of every single question involved. No conversations happen surrounding it whatsoever, and the game just says, go talk to Preston, you're in the Preston ending now. And or more specifically, you go back to the Underground Railroad, and they're like, yeah, no, our entire storyline hinged on the Institute thing, so you had to not make any choices for 6 hours straight in order to make this storyline work either. So go back to Preston. Like if you exert any level of free will moment to moment during quest chains in Fallout 4, you get sent to Preston. He's the bucket for you thought you could roleplay in this game, you fool, you idiot. And in a similar way,
I definitely think that's also a problem. It's like a problem with flag-based games where it's like, it's hard to sequence break a game that is depending on you hitting a contextual point that, tells the game you have seen X thing before you're allowed to move forward. It's the frustration of the developers thinking that you would just be okay with your character doing certain things unquestioningly and then making a choice later, which is the equivalent of Mass Effect being, hey, kill everyone in this bar, but make a moral choice about whether or not the leader should be spared.
The leader, that does
like that. It's that exact dynamic video games keep doing of just like, this is the one way to play this part of the game, and we're ignoring all of the actual things that says about your character. If you do that, then make a choice later, maybe. And you just have to hope that choice is coming, that you get to roleplay eventually.
Do you think that that's the problem with flag-based events? I think it's a more fundamental issue. And it's definitely an issue of Bethesda games, but Mass Effect does suffer from that a little bit as well. Not as much, which is some games only have one way of telling a story. And Bethesda, for all their plastic skeletons, only has one way of telling a story, which is dialogue. And that doesn't happen in Baldur's Gate 3. There's the environmental storytelling. There's like discoveries that you make. Your characters can remark on those discoveries. There's like logs. There's different characters that you can encounter at different locations in certain quests. Like one of the major quests early on in Baldur's Gate 3 is so open-ended that you're like, okay, there's 3 choices at me right now. I can steal, I can kill, and I can convince. Or maybe there's 4. There's even more choices than that. Just you can just sort of intuit from the way the quest is presented. But what is not known to you, and I won't spoil it for you Toaster and Keith, and I won't spoil it for the viewers as well. What is not known to you is that there's even more options to complete that quest then you realize it first. And it's not like plot twist options. It's just sort of ways that you can approach the issue or even just explore. And just find different things, and you're like, oh, this adds other options to an already bountiful.
Yeah, it's like a proper D&D approach to the idea of like this act isn't about completing this quest chain. It's about solving this problem.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the game tells a story with different tools, and Bethesda doesn't do that.
No.
Bethesda, it just has dialogue, which is
And like when I brought up Tyranny, like admittedly my memory is a little foggy on this game, so I find Tyranny to be remarkably unmemorable as a game.
Oh, really?
It was really unmemorable.
Yeah, I feel like people are largely over it already. But Tyranny is the bad guys won already, and they're ruling the entire kingdom, and it's carved up into a bunch of bad guy factions of the bad guys that won. So it's Old Man Logan, and you're in California where the Hulks rule. Like it's Old Man Logan basically.
Yeah.
And what happens is you are sent on a series of missions to handle individual like regions, essentially akin to like Dragon Age Origins, where you have to do each region's quest chain each time, and it may be a slightly non-linear order, and there's major choices about the factions or whatever. But in this case, the choices really are just stay allied with the evil faction you work with or switch sides are like the two competing choices. And so you essentially have one looming choice that's hovering over you the entire playthrough, and you either just continually never make it, or you make it once, at which point now you're permanently locked into the other storyline. Like that's more or less the extent of the impactful choices you can make in this game because of how focused and linear it really is and how little it has to go with.
Yeah.
And the struggle here is that the choice to betray, or the choice to not go through with a particular particular factions or region's storyline on this team is given to you once per region.
Yeah.
And it gets to really weird moments where you reach the guy that's like the archivist or whatever. He's like a lore guy that like can read with his hands, and they take a moment.
Really
they take a moment to explain to you like this guy can read with his hands. Like if he holds a scroll, he instantly memorizes the entire thing without having to read it. And this whole chapter is about getting this forbidden knowledge, super powerful scroll, and the game keeps reinforcing the idea that maybe you shouldn't give it to him.
Yeah.
But the choice does not happen between that information and you giving it to him automatically. There's no choice in between those to in any way use that information and act on it. And I'm like, what the fuck? The fuck is this game? Like I started losing my mind. I'm like, why did this game repeatedly reinforce this lore and information? And then, but like it's at the end of the day, it's Tyranny, a game that has almost no choices. So you don't get a choice. You just give it to him. Like you get two dialogue options that are both give it to him. And I'm like, well then why did you like give me so much doubt about giving it to him? And then you can betray them. You can betray that faction off camera after that mission, because between each mission is when you can choose to leave and go and join the other faction instead. So it's so unsatisfying because you can't actually turn on somebody in the moment that they'd be pissing you off or making you do something you don't want to do. So you're just not acting in character in a deeply frustrating way. And it technically has variables, but all of the variables in that game are just waiting for the fucking admittedly cool concept of being on trial at the end of the game, where they then put you on trial for what your loyalty to the faction or the super god or whatever that is the person that runs all of the factions at once.
Overlord.
The adjudicator puts you on trial for all your behaviors, which is of course like that is the Planescape style hour-long conversation with a billion variables and different like things reacting to stuff you've done in the game. But it's at the end of a game where you never do stuff. You just play a bunch of linear dungeons and exhaust the dialogue over and over again, and maybe make one choice once to change teams. And that is why it's not a good RPG. This is not a very good game, Tyranny.
But I
liked other stuff, like
it's
cool spellcasting and stuff, but
the
story is why we're there.
I thought the spellcasting system in that game was dog shit. I thought the combat mechanics in that game was terrible because it's so flat. Every single magic spell is the same spell under the hood. It just has a different color. Yeah. And then all you do is it's like fucking Morrowind potion crafting. It is in a spell system, but you only have 3 different things you can do, and it just gives you a different color.
Yeah.
So
it
dumb.
was like
I
it was a
hated
series.
that
It was a
game's
series
combat.
of runes that you could combine together to create like different outcomes of spells and so on. It was a fun idea, kind of like how the chanting is a fun idea. Like
Yeah.
I like
Yep.
some of the stuff that the pillars people have Obsidian's brought to spellcasting. Like the chanters are a cool class in pillars.
Yep.
I had two of them. I'm like, yes.
But
It's the thing with the choices though is you need to. It's very much a contextual. Like you're right in what you're saying, but at the same time, Pillars of Eternity has no choices. If you're gonna look at it from that perspective, Pillars of Eternity 1 and no 2 does have choices, but the first one has no choice. It's something that even the
Yeah.
developers admitted on launch that
Oh,
that
yeah.
basically they had to cut like the choice that they could make at the middle of the
Yeah,
game.
no, Pillars is
They had to cut it.
notably full of just doing the content.
Yeah.
And
But
Yeah.
that comes from a history of like Baldur's Gate 1 has no choices. The only reason why Baldur's Gate 2 has choices is because there's like two different quests at the middle of the game. I think it's Act 5 where you can choose to go with this faction or you go to choose to go with the other
Yeah.
faction. But obviously like there's a lot of choices though in the middle because all the side quests can be solved sort of slightly differently and there's the dialogue trees that in and of themselves are choices and that's like the roots of the kind of game that Tyranny is. It's not, you're right in what you're saying, but at the same time, it's just sort of there's a lot of artifice in front of the lack of choices that sort of make up for that. And I think I recall I only played Tyranny once. I think I have the expansion. I definitely have the expansion.
The expansion adds fucking nothing to that game. It is you are
Didn't
not
play.
missing anything.
But I recall the companion. I remember Sirin being very fresh as a companion. I recall the choice I had to make for one of the there's like a strong dude that is in your party, or maybe he's not in your party, but first or whatever. And I recall the choice. Basically, I had to sacrifice his mind, effectively.
Yeah.
I didn't have to. I just chose to do that. And I thought if you try to be a little bit cheeky about how you interpret your attitude to all the choices that are presented to you, you can sort of like justify many of the evil options or the outright evil options and be like either sort of nobody told me or this is none of my business or things like that can if you take the game at face value don't make any sense. But in a let's play, it's kind of an interesting way of approaching things. You can just like
I was
make
just
up
following
excuses.
orders.
Well, I don't like that sort of approach. But I'm saying I'm and I'm really not like I didn't go in that route, but that's also something you can do. I'm just saying like there's when you're talking about world changing events, there's leeway for honest, complete arguments for a lot of the evil choices to be made. And when I say complete,
Yeah.
I mean that's an important aspect because you can also role play characters that are contradictory. You can role play a character that just doesn't see the fullness of his choices, right? And it's not something people do, but you can definitely do that if you want. You can, you know what I mean? Like people who just need somebody to go up to them and say, "Hey, you're doing something wrong because X and Y," and they're like, "Oh, shit, I'm doing something wrong." That doesn't happen in video games, but you could do that if you want. You could just play a character who's, "Oh, I'm gonna kill a million people to save one." Sure, I mean that sounds right? Why wouldn't I do that? And there's people who would do that in real life. Oh, I mean they wouldn't, but because that situation doesn't
Stephanie
happen.
would. I've heard her talk about Madoka Magica before.
Madoka
I
Magica
think that's the one.
It sort of is, yeah. That's no
One of the
spoilers, though.
things I wanted to talk about on this and kind of the reason why I discussed like the bounds of a tabletop game a minute ago though before all of this was just the concept that you had said about like Bird wanting to play this game in a way where he would only ever like where he feels stifled by the fact that he has to allow things to happen that he would find unsavory in an actual tabletop game. And I think the reason why something like that doesn't function in Baldur's Gate 3 or other games like that isn't because they're more limited than actual tabletop, but because in an actual tabletop setting, even when you have a DM that's like improvising and doing interesting things will still happen that the players don't want to happen. Like you're still telling a story.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes players like this are called like destructive players, where they're like, well, we're telling a story and it's all improv, so I should have the agency to just like do what I want and change what I want. But like playing tabletop with characters like that is like really awful. like because the whole contract of we're telling a story collaboratively is this is going to be a story. So there are going to be things that happen no matter what that we are building towards. Like there are narrative ideas and themes, and not all DMs are sandbox DMs, but I like to think that, and I feel like most DMs and most players who've played tabletop will agree with me when they say like at a certain point, the story and the themes of your campaign slowly begin to form. And it gets harder and harder to play against that as you are playing with a group of people, because when you want to tell a good story that's interesting and fun for everyone, you want to lean into the storytelling that has been set up. That's not anything crazy. That's just good writing. So when you're playing, a tabletop and you're like, or when you complain, not you, but like when a royal person here, the royal you complains about
royal.
Like, oh, I didn't like Baldur's Gate 3 because like a character, I was playing this character and then like an NPC I really like died and I couldn't do anything to stop it. It's like, yeah, and if you were at a table right now and you were like, no, but instead of that happening, I throw a knife and like I rolled a 10, but they died. Okay, well, instead of that, I'm going to try to potion and we're going to stop everything that we're doing to try to feed them and lay on hands. And like, yeah, you can improvise and you can do things like that, but like also read the room. like, sometimes a storytelling moment happens, or sometimes things like that, sometimes things like that not even have to occur, but like sometimes it's best to cut your agency and take a step back from the situation to let something play out, to make the conscious collaborative storytelling choice that allowing something to happen, even if you could theoretically, mechanically, by the 100% written rules of the game, like, well, I'm going to stop and I'm going to throw a potion at them and then I'm going to lay on hands and I'm going to action surge and do this and that. And like sitting there and making a scene of it will just break the game and make it not interesting and make it annoying for the people around you and will make the story overall worse. So I think that like it's just interesting to hear people when they complain about Baldur's Gate 3 for some like really nitpicky reason of like, well, I found a potato and I wanted to put the potato in the cannon because I wanted to see them try to shoot a cannon with a potato in it and it didn't let me. This isn't as free as a tabletop game. It's just like, yeah, but if you like spent 45 minutes doing that, maybe it would be funny as a bit, but like I don't think many DMs are going to be sitting here waiting for you to try to figure out the mechanics of rolling a potato into a cannon. Like it's just like at that point you're not even critiquing a game adaptation of a tabletop game. You're just critiquing the concept of like, I wish I could waste more of my and my friend's time, which is like, okay, whatever.
Yeah. In bird stuff, it sounds more like the equivalent of like, apparently he like just the act of wandering around triggers a bunch of like quests that have timers and that he doesn't even know have started, and then he just keeps walking along the wreckage of failed quests that he never even encountered, and he's like, what did even happen here?
Oh, that's the other thing.
It's just like, the frustration of just like when this is the struggle that happens when you try to add more mechanics to a game, is that like the reason why certain other RPGs can be so comfy to play is because they just are action levels that are bookended by dialogue. And the dialogue is where the story and choices happen, and the action is just action. And so you know exactly what's happening at every second. And every time you try to get more ambitious than that, you fly closer and closer to the sun of trying to have a fully reactive world where not only does dialogue affect things, but in a Dark Souls and Prey kind of way, like shooting characters can affect the story, but also like not doing stuff can affect the story. Whoa, and like stuff and like time consequences can happen, and it all bugs up against like the question of like something like say Deus Ex Human Revolution. a game that
Yep.
has a weird section where they have you walk around an office and how long you spend there affects the outcome of the next mission for some reason, because they had one kind of ambitious idea to do that, but they didn't signpost it and it never happens again, so it's not part of the game. And so like
Yep.
it's a part of training players and having them even be able to understand when choices are being made, because in so many games choices only exist in dialogue, but in Baldur's Gate and other games choices can happen just in your actions moment to moment. And
It's also,
if you don't know they're happening, then it's not fun. Like it's frustrating.
it's interesting that you bring
Yeah.
this X-Human Revolution, because it's the exact example of the opposite of what should happen. Because RPG players have been trained for decades to talk to every NPC in the order they appear on your screen. And do all the quests
I was
and loot
just going to talk
everything
about this.
in the order that it appears. And that's something that Bird hasn't been practiced on, I think.
Yep.
Which is fair. I mean, the criticisms that he raises are fair, but they all, like, the audience doesn't. The game is made for an audience that doesn't have that issue, because it's been trained. And
It's funny
and
that you
It's hard to say
bring that up.
that's even the case, though.
It is.
I mean,
I'm saying there's two.
I don't think that this is a Bird issue. This is a common complaint in these kinds of games too. And
so. Yeah,
you hear this a lot. And again, I'm not criticizing Bird. I don't think he was playing destructively completely, and that's why he was having a bad time. You know, I'm sure he was just playing the game the way that he thought was good. It's just this kind of complaint happens really frequently, and it's really interesting because you see people say, I want a game that gives me freedom to do all this stuff. And then games that exist that give you the freedom to do this stuff, people complain because by giving you the freedom to do all of this stuff and have all of these things, you are inherently going to create a system where people will miss things or do things backwards or do them incorrectly.
Yeah.
So what people actually want is they want a system that is very open but waits for them. And that's the reason why, for example, games like Kenshi are not as popular as games like Mass Effect or fucking Fallout 4 or all of these RPGs that we think are bad. Yeah. So Kenshi is like a CRPG that takes place in like in a post-apocalyptic world, but like when you get plopped down, the whole world is persistent and exists, and everything is on a schedule, and you just play. And if you miss something, like if there's a shootout in a town 20 miles away from you, and that's a quest-given NPC that just through the RNG of how the rolls happen gets murdered in that shootout, like, sorry, bud, this playthrough you can't do that quest. You should have gotten there earlier. You should have looked out for it, I guess. You know,
RPGs rely on that sort of randomness of exploration and missing quests to allow for replayability.
Yeah.
Older RPGs specifically.
We're currently in a chokehold with that exact concept in Termina.
Yep.
Where it's just
exactly.
What the fuck? Because this is a thing to get into. Like, there is no default player behavior in any of these games.
Yep.
Like, there's always that's why I was pushing back against you saying that players are trained a certain way. I'm like, every time I play an RPG, there's two competing ways of dealing with NPCs, and I never know which one to go with because they both seem valid in different ways. One is to run around like an MMO and pick up every single quest. You have 75 quests, then try to remember what the fuck was happening in them and do them in whatever order you can do in this big, messy, nonlinear thing of doing like one objective at a time across 12 quests and rotating through them because that's just what's nearby. And the other one is to pick up one quest, then go do that quest, then come back and find another quest. And yeah, you'll get surprised by new NPC interactions on the way. Like, doing this quest, I crossed this bridge and this bridge has the thing happening and now this quest is happening, and you might get sidetracked, obviously, in a ADHD Zelda sort of way, like Tears of the Kingdom things. But like, there's very much there's very much a narrative and even like just player memory and understanding the story and resonating with it incentive to not pick up all the quests and try to parse them out in a more reasonable way. True. And those are directly mutually exclusive approaches to playing the game that do not work against each other.
But the second way is the way that gets you to lose quest givers and things like that.
Yeah, but it's just the struggle there. Games. And in Termina,
it's a more fun way of
I do think
in Termina what we're experiencing that's completely wild is that like there is no default way to play Termina. Like, it immediately throws you into several possible branching directions to even navigate it. It has a save system that progresses time, and it also it both builds on and contradicts the things you learned in the last game in a sort of Resident Evil 4 remake sort of way.
Yeah.
So you just absolutely do not have a default player behavior. Everyone's going to approach that game differently while they're trying to parse what the fuck to do in it. And so I beat the game in our first run, and I encountered almost no NPCs in the entire video game. And just in general, like this is a death game where the roster is shown to you periodically, and which ones are alive and so on is tracked. And throughout we literally beat the game, and I didn't know who several of them even were still, because I'd never seen their faces. and I'm like, I went everywhere as far as I can tell. I explored the full map. I went through several parts of the map multiple times over the course of the campaign. I have no idea what these characters' triggers were or where they went or what they're up to. And now Toaster's playing. He has a full party of not only characters that I didn't recruit in my party, he has a full party of specifically the characters I never saw. It's unhinged, and I'm like, what the fuck? He just walked down this alley at 2 p.m. on Monday, and he's just here now, and he wasn't any other part of the campaign. And like Toaster's doing I somehow managed to perfectly thread the needle of missing every NPC in the entire game, and Toaster's doing the opposite. And I cannot from the outside justify his behavior as being more reasonable than mine. But that's just what this is.
Yeah, I think with this particular case, like it's an example of like, I think the intended behavior and the default behavior are going to be two different things. That being said, I do think, I don't know if the creator of Termina knows exactly what player habits are, but like industry wise, this stuff is pretty well documented. Like default player behavior and like what you can expect a player to do and how you can expect them to interact with and respond to basic cues is like an actual thing that is objectively quantified and very, very well understood. So that does exist, right? Like it is there's a reason why games paint ladders with yellow paint splatter so that
I was literally about to say that, like you got to paint the crates yellow.
Yeah, exactly. Because we know if you don't, doesn't matter how good the level design is, doesn't matter how well signposted it is, people will just not pay attention because they're trained to not interact with things that don't have their attention drawn to it. That's similarly why certain types of games like Souls games or like Termina or like other games that like buck trends and are like, we want you to build your experience up from the ground and play this game like you've never touched a video game before and this is your first experience with it, are really challenging and difficult especially when given to people who play a lot of video games. And I think that's also why people respond so positively to things like Baldur's Gate 3, because Baldur's Gate 3 strikes a really good balance between things you expect from video games if you've played a lot of video games and unique new things that build off its own systems really organically. But with Fear and Hunger Termina, what's interesting is that I think our issue, and I think your issue with your playthrough, Keith, isn't that you did anything wrong. I think it's that let's playing this game is the absolute worst way to play this game. Because I think the default and intended way to play a Fear and Hunger game is you play for 10 minutes, you know everything is lethal, you know that saving costs money, basically, it costs a resource. So you sit down for 200 hours and you play that first day and you get as far as you possibly can without saving, and you pray you have good RNG, and if you don't have good RNG, you immediately quit back to title and you start back up. Like, I think that is like how that game is.
Yeah. It's a game that's meant to be played like a roguelike, where you just keep starting over and you play it dozens of times, and that's the only way you reasonably uncover half of what's even happening, is that it's just there's nothing, it's not signposted where things are. You just will encounter it eventually, because on your 300th run you happen to go down this alley at sunrise.
Yep. And I do think that there is some clever signposting in the game of like, oh, this character walks to the north at the start and this character walks to the west. And those are mutually exclusive choices, so you have to like that's the game telling you pick one or the other. You know, like that's cool. That's interesting stuff.
The game opens with the salaryman and the reporter literally walking in directions. But then the characters that you're finding, they literally aren't at the start. They're just not there.
Well, like
you have no idea where they are or what to expect of them.
The example I was gonna use is Osa, who is the mage or one of the mages in Fear and Hunger, where like I just encountered him in an alley. Like there's no indication that he's going to be in that alley. There's no indication, you know, I looked for him. I couldn't find him in the first time period that you have. Fear and Hunger Termina, for those who have not watched the playthrough or don't know about it, it has sort of like a Majora's Mask system where time progresses objectively and you cannot get it back. And it progresses when you save. And then every single time you save, when the time progresses, characters are on a different schedule. So they move to different locations. And there are some of them that make some sense now that I figured it out, where it's like I think that it is a reasonable assumption, or there's a reasonable logic to where some characters are, where like we just met the doctor, Daniel, and he walked up to the village where everyone is sick and dying, and he spends the morning, the very first time block you have in the game, investigating this village because he's a doctor and he wants to know why these people are sick. And like, yeah, you don't see him walk up there, but there's a reasonable assumption there that like maybe the doctor will be doing doctor stuff and that's where I would find him. But we just happen to choose wrong. It's less sensical
than that though, because the morning is where the game starts and he's not there in the morning.
Yeah, sorry.
Because I've been through the exact area he shows up in like 10 different times of the game, and none of them were the specific one where he's there, which is like the afternoon of the first day, and only
you are correct. It is afternoon. It's not morning.
He's seemingly nowhere at the beginning of the game, and then disappears immediately afterwards. If you don't catch him exactly then it's like, well, I already explored there. No one was there. Like, there are characters that make way more sense. Like, Karen goes off in a direction at the beginning of the game, and every time period, she's, like, a few levels deeper into that route until eventually she's, like, inside the city. And it's like, okay, this character, I know what her deal is. Shockingly, I recruited her. Almost like those are correlated concepts.
Yes. But what I was going to say with Dan is that, like, Dan being a doctor, going to the place, like, you can at least say, okay, maybe there's something here where I could correlate this on a second playthrough, or like make a reasonable assumption that maybe if I want to find him, I should look for where sick people are because he's a doctor.
Yeah, it just involves playing the game like a data miner, where you're checking that location every single time period to see if he finally appears.
Yes. What doesn't make sense is, why is Osa meditating in this alley surrounded by really annoying monsters and jump scare encounters? Like, that's just a fuck you. That's just a, like, you happen to be here, good luck. Because remember, we in I guess some of the people who aren't on Patreon won't know this, but at one point we deal with Osa, and then if you remember in the playthrough, Keith, immediately after we did that, fucking needle spawned beneath us, and I was like, and had to run. And like so this is not like there are definitely moments in that game that are just there to say fuck you, because it is that roguelike sense of like, all right, I am going to get information by consistently starting and failing and restarting. And the interesting part of the design on that front is that the game can be trusted once you have that information. That information is not, it may be placed randomly, but it's reliable in that if I know where someone is at a certain time, they will be there every time. So that's I think the grand design of Fear and Hunger is just like uncovering finding the puzzle pieces. You're putting together a puzzle that's entirely one color. Right? Like, you're not building a picture, you're building a 1,000 piece puzzle, and all of the pieces are just jet black.
It's just
but when you know where certain pieces go, you know where they are. Yes, exactly. And I think games balance between doing something like that. Game.
Although you can never fully reliably play it the same way because of the fact that this entire loop system is purely random.
I honestly think the way to make Fear and Hunger a better game is to give it static loot. I really don't think the RNG loot in that game is
It is bizarre.
good. It's so
It is
frustrating that
absolutely
it's a
strange.
system. I think it's actively in like against the design of the game, which is fine, but it's just I don't like it very much. But I think it's interesting. It's interesting thinking about the game overall because there's it's like a weirdly parsable game once you learn to speak its language, but that also means understanding like what parts of the game are just there to say fuck you. Where it's like, okay, I will just never be able to predict what RNG will get. I'll never be able to rely on items, but I can rely on people being in certain places. So I guess if I want to get this person or help this person, I need to just RNG all the items, and that does give it some replayability, which is interesting. But in comparison to a Baldur's Gate 3, like I'm not going to hold it against Baldur's Gate 3. The fact that things happen outside of my view, or that like doing one quest will kill another quest, and that's it. Sorry, like. I think that's interesting. I think that's fine. And I think that's also the reason why, like, we've talked about this in terms of a Let's Play, but I think outside of a Let's Play circumstance, like, listening mode is, like, not necessary. In that, I think that there is a place for, like, asynchronous, synchronous multiplayer or situations where, like, a game world just exists without you, and if you're just not there to witness something and your opponent or your buddy wanders into a settlement and starts a conversation with someone that you're not right next to, like,
yeah,
you should ask your buddy what he was up to and see if he can summarize that well. You know, like that's an interesting thing.
Oh,
too.
absolutely. But that's a thing we
that's
tried
just
before.
Bad for a Let's Play.
Yeah, well, or more specifically, it requires a completely different solution. Because what we did is,
Yes.
So I played Divinity Original Sin 2 the way we're currently playing Baldur's Gate 3, but I played Wasteland 3 with Andrew differently, which is that every time we went into town, we just muted ourselves in Discord, and we just recorded the zone separately and just both did stuff. And then we would then, as if we were calling each other on a walkie-talkie, essentially, we would unmute ourselves when it was time to reach out, because we were like calling for backup or thinking it's time to wrap things up or move on and so on. And that was a very different feel, and also meant that I needed to get both people's footage and combine all of them, because otherwise the audience doesn't get to see anything that happened on Andrew's perspective, and that's frustrating for them. It's a different way of doing things. It definitely frees things up a bit. Like there's definitely like moments where I'm like, I'm listening in on Toaster, but then it just turned into merchanting, and do I just sit here and like watch him merchant and for the next 20 minutes and then just edit this whole part out, or do I go on an adventure but then like does he then just listen to me have a one-sided conversation in comms with somebody else, or do I mute myself? Like there's so many permutations of how to try to record that game moment to moment, and if we don't stick to the same one, then I have to interpret while editing what the fuck is even happening and whether I need to change my entire editing format. So it's just it is a nightmare.
My solution here for Baldur's Gate specifically is I really wish instead of showing an ear, it showed you the picture of who they were talking to and below them what they are.
Yeah.
Like if I could
that would
just
be useful.
If I could just see you're talking to a merchant, I could give two rats asses about the conversation. But if I see a face and I'm like, who the hell is that? And it says like, I don't know, it has like a picture of a quest icon. I'm like, okay, that's someone for a quest. I should probably listen in on that.
I just wish they should give us full like split screen. Just give it to us, because the game has split screen for local, and I'm like, it'd be nice if the game split screened when my buddy talks to someone, and then I could see what's happening, but I could also like still be like picking up loot or whatever. Like Toaster can be going around thieving without necessarily missing the entire conversations.
Yeah.
The problem with Wasteland is that I bought into the advertising and thought it was this crazy, cool, asynchronous experience where you can literally like diverge and go into different locations, then encounter the aftermath of the other person's choices and so on. But when you're playing co-op in the game, you literally can't be on a different map.
Yeah.
So that really ruined that concept. Like I thought, like in Wasteland 2, at the beginning, you're given two choices of places to go first. And then it's like, aha, I'm being clever. There's consequences for your actions. Whichever place you didn't go to first is way worse now because you didn't save them.
Yeah.
And so that's a fun little bit of variability. I was thinking that something like that might happen with multiplayer, where I go one place, Andrew goes another place. We literally do those entire quest chains and zones on our own without each other.
Yeah.
And then we separately then encounter the aftermath without context of what the other one did. Would have been a cool thing. And that's much in like a Peter Molyneux talking about Fable 1 sort of way. The press stuff about that game lets your imagination run wild about what the game might be doing. And then at the end of the day, it was literally just, yeah, you can just both hang out on the same map and talk to characters at the same time if you want.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, so it's just Divinity. This game already came out. I've played this game already, guys. Well, I played it with 4 people.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, I agree with that. I mean, I think that's true. My point that I was trying to get out there is just like there's an interesting design question of how do you create this world that is as open and as living and as free as people claim they want, while also like not making people feel like they're missing out. Like the thing is that like it's like one of those examples of like people complain about things but they don't actually want they don't actually want the thing that they're saying would solve the complaint. Where it's like people don't want Kenshi. I mean, I want Kenshi. Kenshi's cool. Kenshi's a cool ass game. But I don't think most people who are like sitting there on Reddit being like, Baldur's Gate 3 isn't actually a good tabletop game. It's too restrictive. Like, buddy, why aren't you playing Kenshi? Like, you just want a fake thing that you are building up in your head as a cool game that just doesn't exist. You know, and
yeah,
and
or
being
even
able to create this like
where everything's happening on its own, whether you get there or not, and so on.
Yeah.
Which
like,
mysteriously
there's a
people
reason
liked
why...
that video game when it was called Dead Rising, but when it's not called Dead Rising, they don't like it when that happens.
I mean, people complain about Majora's Mask and Dead Rising and Pathologic and like any game that has the gall to tell a player no, you can't see something because you didn't do it right. Like, people just complain about that.
Yeah.
But then people are like, I want the mythical free game that allows me to do whatever I want, and I'd be such a good gamer that I'd never miss anything. It's
I
like,
guess it's the idea where the metrics for player data collapse because of the timers in Dead Rising, but then everyone complains they remove the timers from Dead Rising and Pikmin.
Yes, exactly.
Which does bother me a little bit. When I think back, I'm like, I do want to play the new Pikmins, but the timer, like, why the timer's gone? Isn't that that's mentally for me, from having played and not ever finished Pikmin as a kid, that's like the identity of that game to me. So it's like weird to think that they make, when I see new Pikmin, it looks like it doesn't have the timer, and it looks like a series of like Super Mario 3D World individual challenge levels, like that don't look like they're in the context of a survival world. It's very odd. I wonder what's going on with that series. But people seem to like it now, so it seems like one of these franchises did better at removing the timer, because people do seem to sincerely hate Dead Rising 3 and 4.
Yeah.
I think one of the aspects of tabletop that is just inherently impossible to do in video games, at least as of right now, is the sort of individual storytelling that you make in your head about. I mean, that can happen in video games, but you need to sort of abstract yourself from what's being presented on the screen. Like, there's 2 examples for me about what I'm talking about. One is they both happened on camera, but one of them happened on Keith's camera, so maybe it's a little bit more relevant. Peridin was a character that I played in a tabletop session that we had. And his storyline was very rewarding for me personally, because I got to build a non-traditional character in the sense of how it aligns or how it fits into the alignment system of Dungeons and Dragons. And sort of his motivations fit into the consequences of his actions very neatly, in a way that when you take a step back and you're not playing Peridin anymore, as I was, because I was playing him, which is a different perspective. It's a first-person perspective. But I take a step back and I look at the story, and I think that that's an interesting story that, you know, you could make a movie about that, you know, about that story. Unfortunately, it's a story that mostly I am privy to, because I understood Peridin's motivations where nobody else did. But that didn't need to happen. But it did happen. But what I'm saying is that sort of storytelling can happen. That sort of first-person storytelling can happen in tabletops without affecting the overall storyline. It didn't. Like it wasn't what the campaign was about in our session. And
Oh yeah, that's
his
Sandals.
Yeah,
Sandals.
Sandals is
From
Toaster's
Cape
character
Escape.
in Cape Escape.
my
Is
character in Cape.
so much of
Escape.
that character is him making choices that nobody else in the game and most of the players don't understand.
Yeah.
I think for Paradin, if people reached out and asked, I would have said the reasons why. Like even if
So,
the DM asked, "Hey,
man.
hey Colonel, why are you? Why is that choice? What is Paradin thinking?" I would have said it out loud. I would have broken character and just say, "Hey, he had thinking this because of this.
Yeah.
This is his right." And like nobody even did that, let alone reach out in. Well, they did happen to that some characters reached out, but not as much as would be necessary for explaining motivations.
Yeah.
But I think if you have an inscrutable character in a tabletop session, the DM can absolutely make it clear, make it not inscrutable. Just ask the player. I think.
Yeah.
I don't really see the problem in that.
Well, so there is sort of I have a really interesting comparison to this, or a response to this, which is just that like people we're gonna wade into some like interpretation territory here, but like people literally ask me why does your character make this decision, and I tell them the exact reason why. And I'll even say like there is a mechanical reason why I'm making this decision that is backed up objectively by the mechanics of the game, and they will respond like, well, death of the author, I think they did it because of this. I'm like,
the author?
no,
That's not what that
that's
means.
not why.
That's not what,
And
not
so
what
like
the other means.
yeah, and like, but also
That
what I'm
is
saying
what
is
it
like the context of characters and RPGs, especially when people consume them, even as players in a game like Baldur's Gate or as watchers of an actual play, like at a certain point, people are just gonna read into what they want to read into, and like it doesn't matter what the reality of the situation is or like the reasons behind it. Like I can explain myself blue, behind why Sandals acts the way he does. I have a fucking character Bible for this character that determines exactly the reasons why he makes certain decisions and his thought process behind them and his justifications for them and his emotional responses to them. Like, you see it very frequently, and this isn't me really rallying about it because, like, I don't mind that people. I have plans for Sandals as a character that I don't think people are truly ready for, but
in
Sandals
stark contrast to the plans I had for Paradin, which was just to bake a cake, and he never did it.
Yeah,
that was literally the only plan. He never did it.
Using Sandals as an example, he is a character that I am very intimately understanding of, and he's very different from me in real life. But that is how I make the decisions with him, is I understand his exact thought process, and I'm like, so I'll do something. I'm going to explain this some behind the scenes Cape Escape content for you all to get you all riled up about Cape Escape. But like, Sandals is a character that commits arson quite a bit in the Cape Escape scenario. And people immediately, and I played it as an underhanded subterfuge thing that he was doing. In fact, there were so many, Keith comments on it a few times, but I don't think people really understood how often I was doing secret rolls to the DM. I was rolling things with Caw 5 or 6 or 7 times a game, like 7 times a session, to pull off a bunch of stuff that I had directly called out as a like, hey, Sandals is going to roll for, insight or whatever. I'm going to roll for preparedness to see if I have this, or I'm going to roll for this to see if I can tell what is going on here, because Sandals wants to understand the situation, and he does not think the people in his party are treating it with the respect and the fear that it deserves. So he is going to solve this problem objectively and mechanically, but he's not going to bring it up to people, because if he does, it will make a scene of it and will complicate and threaten the lives of the people around him. So like, people will be watching Cape Escape and they'll see me do a private roll, And then next thing you know, in the next scene, there's a camper that's on fire that we were just in. They're like, oh, Sandals is a psychopath. He was trying to kill everyone. And it's like, actually, objectively, and I have the proof of it, what I was doing was scanning the room to make sure that no one would get hurt, looking for things that could explode, that could accidentally kill all of us, making sure that the material cost and all of the things that would be lost in this fire would not be detrimental to all of these characters' well-being. And I'm doing checks to make sure there's no shrubbery around the things I'm setting on fire so that the fire doesn't spread into town. We're in a desert. Sand does not catch on fire. In fact, it is used to snuff out fires. So we can do things like set a bunch of RVs on fire without killing everyone. Like, all of these things were objectively happening. But then people want to read into the writing that they have, this image of the character that they have in their heads of like, he's an unhinged sociopath who's like one step away from murdering everyone. And like, yeah, did I play him underhanded in a way to like tug on that and mislead people? Yes, but that doesn't mean that the truth of the situation, which is that he was doing things with people's good intentions in mind, even when the things that he did were morally compromised or dangerous, it doesn't mean that that's not true. And like, people obviously, because this is art, this is a thing that we're performing, they want to read into it and they want to have their interpretations and their fandom interactions with it. But like, that also applies not just to regular tabletop, but like games where players have freedom. Things will happen that maybe don't surface to the player, but are objectively or mechanically present and ludonarratively present. And people respond really negatively to these things when it is revealed that they have missed or that there was information that was not surfaced to them, even if it was available or wasn't available to them, as surfaced by the game itself. And I think that's like an interesting player interaction problem, because it creates this situation where like the truth of something doesn't really matter because it just, people will just critique it regardless of what the actual circumstance is. And it makes writing for these things, tabletop or video game inspired by tabletop or otherwise, really difficult because like it doesn't matter how well signposted your story is or how well designed your characters are or whatever. Like people are going to see the sullen looking, elf with dark hair and bangs who, is having a bad day, and they're going to be like, look, it's the goth elf. It's like, this you don't know that. You don't know that about her, but that's how she's going to be Flanderized. That just is the way it is. It doesn't matter how nuanced or objectively true or not true certain actions Sandals took were in Cape Escape. People just decided in episode 1 that he was an unhinged sociopath because I made some jokes. And that's just how they're reading the character from now on. And that just is the way it is. Like, there's no way to get around it.
That's also a tool that you can use to tell a story. Like, I do that a lot in my lyrics writing, which is to just leave things vague enough that, I mostly write for myself these days, but still, like, anybody can take their own meaning and maybe even more personal meaning from vague lyrics than they can from very specific lyrics.
Well, it's also just like you have to. It's a whole separate skill of figuring out how to manage which parts of the story are memorable versus which ones are the objective facts of what happened. Like, what are the evocative images and moments? And so, like, Sandals being unhinged is more memorable than the literally unspoken things happening behind the scenes about what's going on with him and so on. Mm-hmm. And so, like, it's like the equivalent of like people's takeaway from Silence of the Lambs and Psycho is that those both villains are trans, and both movies literally have a scene explaining they're not trans. No one remembers those scenes exist because they're not very funny or memorable or scary or interesting. You remember, you remember the cross-dressing and the shower stabbing and so on. You don't remember a bunch of guys in a suit speaking in monotone about how Billy wasn't a true transsexual and all this other stuff. Like, those literally delete themselves from your memory, from even existing.
But you can't also expect the effects of the portrayal of those characters in those movies to just vanish because you add a footnote and say, actually, they're not transsexual. or they're not transgender or whatever verbiage they use. Because the imagery of that, it creates meaning of itself.
It's
especially
more
when
powerful.
That's my point. Yeah, is that
Yeah.
with sandals or any other situation, like explaining something can't undo the viscerally memorable way that's portrayed and what stands out to people the first time.
Which is why I'm okay ultimately with the way Paradin had its meeting for you guys and for people watching as well, or had its end or his end, because I think it was a fun. Hopefully, it was fun anyway for people to just have an unscrutable character that couldn't really be read too well, and ultimately, I was not going for in that direction with the character that I made after him, but that was more or less where people were going as well. I don't know why, but I thought it was a very straightforward character. I was playing him straightforward, but people were like, I don't understand this guy's deal.
We've had some interesting learning experiences because your next character was also a character who you seem to think was being portrayed in a very different way than everyone was perceiving them.
Yep.
No, I was trying to portray him in a way that I was failing at. But
I was gonna say I relate to that deeply, like trying to play a character one way and then everyone responding to it extremely differently.
How do you play a cutesy character though? Like how can you do that? Like, just obviously
be very cute. I don't know.
Inherently be cute so that people read it as sincere and not as misleading.
Yeah. I'm about to play against type in a tabletop RPG for maybe the first time ever, so I'll get back to you on that. Because my next character is going to be a lot, but I've almost exclusively played standoffish characters of few words, like 6 times in a row.
I had my character was a tiefling with like it was,
and they all could have gone somewhere, but all those campaigns ended before they fully finished. But fucking in 14 episodes, the story and other characters brought stuff out of Jet, and that was entertaining. That has not historically happened, even though it should have. But on the topic of like gamers not knowing what they want in RPGs and so on, or not saying the right thing or whatever, like I think it really is like, I think that your point might slightly be missing the point about what people want from tabletop RPGs, but it might be accurately reacting to what they say they want. But I don't think that players, when people say that they want the tabletop RPG experience from video games, I don't think that, like, I think it's actually I think it's an artificial creation of video games, not a reactive thing to tabletop RPGs to have a schedule. Like having a like tabletop RPGs are completely reactive to the player, and one of the solutions to that video games have tried to make is to create a world with rules and schedules and health bars and sorry, you can't do that quest this week because on Wednesdays this Oblivion NPC hunts wolves and maybe they died this time and will never show up again. Like inherently that's actually that's an evolutionary, like a technological dead end created by video games that is an attempt to solve a problem in the approach to approximating RPGs, but is not actually an element of real RPGs. Like you can have an NPC who has a schedule and says to meet them at 2:00 in a tabletop RPG, technically, but that's not an inherent element of those games. Those games being a realistic world is not actually a part of them being a reactive world, but that was the solution that video games made up for that. So yes, it is deeply frustrating and can be very disappointing when you have an entire path of your narrative in your video game be redirected because a character you've literally never heard of died off camera to a simulation or something. And that is a uniquely video gamey problem created by the video game if you see it as a problem. The thing about tabletop RPGs is you literally can have your cake and eat it too, in that you can have a massively reactive world that feels realistic because it's actually reacting to you and interacting with what you're doing and respecting your character arc and other stuff's happening, but also things happen to punish you for acting outside of the bounds of the things you're allowed to do, and like there's rules. It is never it is never fully some toddlers going, well, I actually have a laser. Well, I've got an anti-laser force field, and then they have this escalating back and forth forever. But it's also never a concrete, like, fixed world. And this is made all the more obvious by like, if you played with any decently adaptive dungeon master, they will physically unmake their reality and move pieces of the story and setting around and rearrange it canonically, because if you haven't observed it yet, then the way they planned it doesn't have to be how it actually works, and they can just move it and change it and then just make it react to the thing that is happening right now. Like to the point where, like, I had one dungeon master admit that he invented an entire underwater dungeon where we fell into this lake following this boat, and underneath it was an air bubble, and there was an entire kingdom down there, and it was entirely reactive to him just trying not to kill off this character because of what was about to happen, and that was going to be that was not going to actually be a satisfying consequence for the thing. So the entire next few weeks took place in a setting he made up on the fly. Like, it's just how things can go.
But what I guess what it was saying there
in a video game
is
super can't.
One with that though, RPG systems, like tabletop RPG systems that do simulate real world, like, is an actual thing. That's not just a thing from video games. In fact, a lot of video games that took the scheduling from tabletop campaigns and games that built out higher levels of simulation. Yeah, like, that solution has been a thing that was in tabletop. It is very niche, and that's why they're not popular.
Like, exponentially more niche than the video games that use those features themselves.
Yes. And then, but the other thing to this is, you said, like, my DM made up this whole situation that was reacting to me and reacting to our player, and, like, yeah, that's what people want, but that also still gets to the core of the issue, which is what I'm talking about, which is that there's still, like, a pre-planned story that's happening that you need to get from point A to point B at. So yes, the DM can accommodate that, but they're still railroading you. They're just railroading you with more steps along the way. That's what I'm saying. And so when people say, oh, I want the magic and freedom of a tabletop game, like, I don't want to be railroaded. I want the freedom to just have things happen, like, on the fly. What they're actually saying is, I just want the game to be more adaptable, because they want it to be more like the fact that tabletops also railroad you. They're just more clever about how they do it.
Right. But also, like, the ending of Cape Escape and the conditions that it ended at are massively divergent from anything that Ka wanted to do, even if it took place in the same location and the same, like, thing was resolved. Everything in that room is so different from what he set out to do. I'm trying not to talk about it because people are watching the reruns.
Yeah, and, like, well, obviously, like, we had to move things around and stuff. But again, that still gets to the point that, like, the endings that we were at were planned. And yes, they were partially planned by us, and that the tabletops have the benefit of being developed as you play them, which is going to always be inherently different than a video game.
It's so satisfying to be invested and even a part of the storytelling process, as opposed to picking options in a pre-programmed thing, which is the struggle.
Yeah. But I guess what I'm saying is that, like, a situation, like, again, just to manufacture a situation, like, if we at the very last moment of Cape Escape were like, all right, now that we have established the stakes of this setting and we're in this last moment and we all decide to go out to Denny's, yeah, maybe we could do that, but that would be a really unsatisfying or uninteresting thing. Like, that level of freedom doesn't actually beget anything meaningful. So when people say they want freedom, they're not actually talking about they're not talking about the ability to just actually be free and make random choices. What they're talking about is they want to be able to navigate to the preset choices or the preset
and I don't think anyone's actually saying that either. I think it's just that everyone's experienced the frustration of wanting to do something in a situation and then that just not being an option because the game didn't consider that idea, or it was cut or something. And
but I mean, like, at the same time,
you are ultimately assigning a pact to play a character and behave within the reasonable behaviors of the character you wrote, hopefully, which is its own other thing of, like when I talk about my murder hobo friends that I had to play certain games with, and just like, oh, they don't understand what this is. They don't understand what a tabletop RPG is or what playing a character is, and that's ruining this all. But I don't think that's the most constructive direction to go in, because it's just kind of like an off the rails way of discussing it, because it's a thing that no one really wants to begin with for the most part.
Yeah, but my point is the discourse around it is poisoned because the way people talk about it isn't actually indicative of the problems that they are taking with things, which is like, yes, it's reasonable to say, I'm frustrated that I couldn't tell this character no in a position that would make sense because the game signposted it. Like using the tyranny example that we went over earlier, tyranny is just kind of a bad game. That's not a fundamental core issue with Baldur's Gate 3 or with all tabletop approximations. There are plenty of ways to do tabletop approximations. It's not even a problem inherent with video games.
Not like the ultimate review. Just like how the very ideas of what's cool or bad about tabletop RPGs are themselves not meant to be literal examples of what happens, but ideas of what can happen. Like, yes, you can try to romance the boss. It's probably not applicable in most scenarios, and depending on the type of dungeon master, it's probably not going to happen. But it also is on the table in certain ways that you can you can take that. It's supposed to be illustrative of how you can take a narrative in a completely different direction. Meanwhile, rocks falls, everyone dies is not supposed to literally speak about exclusively the concept of having rocks fall on everybody. It's the idea that your dungeon master ran a scenario where everyone just unsatisfyingly dies against a thing that has no narrative resonance, and it's not a cool outcome for the story, and everyone just goes home feeling like they wasted their time.
No, completely.
That's a very good point. It kind of ties into another, like a sort of a thing tabletop role-playing games have going for them, which is that everybody, including the DM, obviously, everybody is invested in having a good time. You're not there judging anybody else. Like you may judge other people at the table, but even then, even when you're like disagree with their choices, you're still trying to have a good time together. That's a very different attitude towards that people have towards video games. When you're playing even an RPG, you're playing there. You're trying having a good time, but it's a different kind of responsibility of who has a good time. It's the game's responsibility. If the game sucks, you're like, okay, this game sucks. I'm gonna go on Reddit.
Yeah. And, well, that also gets to the thing you started talking about at the very beginning of this podcast, Colonel, which is that in a video game you can save scum, and that's okay. And your investment level and what is possible for you is much more open in that regard than in a tabletop setting where it's like, well, if Sandals dies, he's dead. Like, we can't save reload on Cape Escape episode 7. There's also that degree,
this actually gets into cool things of what was happening behind the scenes. Is that almost akin to like sexual role play, where you like preemptively make agreements about like what's okay and what's not okay and so on. Like there was a lot of discussion. Like, for example, there was a session 0 where we discussed like the basic like boundaries of the game and where it could go and what kind of stuff was and wasn't on the table. Like, because inherently this was going to be horror and like death and gore and other stuff like that. There was going to be things where like, okay, what stuff should be allowed and what stuff should be like not allowed. And like I brought up like the idea of like, okay, looking at the response to Yick, we probably don't want to be directly evocative of any real life disappearances or murders and so on. Like that kind of stuff goes on the table. And similarly, when the horror stuff started ramping up, like you said that Sandals dies and that's it, but at the same time, there was the idea of specifically how will we handle deaths or whatever happens when you're corrupted, because the player's still there and technically the character can still be there. It's just what form will the character take, because we were discussing preemptively what will happen if this or that character dies, and in this setting it's very possible they would then return the next episode as one of these corrupted things that we're dealing with otherwise. And like there's a lot of options. It's all about just discussing discussing what's going to happen.
It's like a contract
and what can happen. Like you just need everyone needs to be. We need to trust that everyone is there to have a good time and is equally invested in having this story play out.
But that's engaging with things in good faith, right? Like that's like we're building a contract with something
being
where we
actual
intend to
friends
do something,
and not being a selfish asshole that ruins your friend's fun and so on.
And
which is
I guess
which is why so many
point,
tabletop RPG groups collapse, is they find the shitty friend. Like so many failed tabletop RPG campaigns I've had, everyone in that group would point to the person that ended it. Like, you know
Yeah.
what happened. Like, oh, that was the guy that threw a weird tantrum because the dungeon master wasn't adhering cleanly enough to the spell book rules of exactly how this mechanic works and made everyone uncomfortable and everyone didn't want to play anymore. Or this other group where this one person just was not maintaining a character and would not move forward in a functional way and was just like sandbagging everything we were doing. Like, you would know exactly each time who it was, and it's like a friendship test where you often might not talk to that person again.
Yeah. I think what I'm saying with this stuff too is just that, like, when you go into a game, I'm going to use like Fear and Hunger, not even Baldur's Gate, but like Fear and Hunger as an example. Like, you are making you are making a contract with that game, right? Like, you are saying, like, I agree to the terms that this game is setting out. And like, part of that is an issue of like, people don't want to get spoiled, so they don't want to look into like what exactly is in a game and stuff like that. And like, there are ways to communicate that better. But like, in my mind, when people complain about the limitations of a game they have opted into playing on that front, not in terms of like, oh, the writing is bad, I wish it was better, but just like, I don't understand why I can't start a bakery in Baldur's Gate 3. It's just like, well, yeah, but you didn't play the bakery game. You agreed to play Baldur's Gate 3. You bought Baldur's Gate 3. Play Baldur's Gate 3 and be happy that you're getting Baldur's Gate 3. That's the story that you agreed that you wanted to play that you are now saying you opt out of. And that's sort of what I'm saying when I say like the bounds and freedom of a tabletop game and the bounds and freedom of a video game are both established by the contract you determine at the start. The only difference is that contract is determined by a developer in terms of a video game, and it's hard set. And the contract and terms of service of a tabletop situation that you're playing can change and modify slightly, but still is ultimately made by a player that you are speaking to directly that is catering it to you.
That's why I'm more or less. I've always been more or less okay with role-playing games that have preset characters with stories and backgrounds and all this sort of stuff. Like in like Mass Effect does that to a certain extent, but it still tries to play or pay a little bit lip service to people who want custom backgrounds, even though it's very much the preset character of Shepard.
I was in the streets. There will be one guy who shows up. Is like, I remember you from the streets, and we're gonna be the bad element and try to drag you back into that. This will happen once, and never be mentioned again.
Pretty much.
I meet you outside of Flux the second time you go to Flux. I remember I played Mass Effect 1 7 times.
But it's a sort of a thing that some RPG players are really upset that like The Witcher has a preset character.
I was about to say, like, I'm actually a very big fan of video game RPGs, especially like of that kind of like the post BioWare sort of subgenre of them. I'm a fan of them having a established character that you then try to roleplay, and you are then making choices within the range of how they'd behave, because helps.
Because then the story can be about you. Yeah,
it does so much to contextualize the choices and make them in some ways more meaningful and more sensical than out of compared to like Fallout 4 promising you the idea that you can play the grandest spectrum of any personality of Wastelander you can imagine, but this is the story every single time, and this is the primary decision splitting point every single time, and that is a dilemma that is inherent to your character somehow, no matter how you played the game up till now. Like, it's like video games are so nearly incapable of handling a complete blank slate, do whatever you want with it character, that it's actually extremely helpful to just give me a character that has a range he can be played in.
Yeah, well, they can handle that, but it's just not in the same style. Like, for example,
especially not with voice acting.
That's one aspect, but there's others as well. Like The Sims, for example, is a great storytelling game. It's a great role-playing game if you want to play it like that. But the stories are very specific. They're domestic stories. They're not. They're mundane. They're small in the sense of, small. I think not epic. But that doesn't mean they're not worth telling, and that it certainly doesn't mean that you can't have fun. It's just it's a different kind of storytelling device. But if you want to tell stories about dragons and how the planes are converging in themselves and everything is breaking apart and you need to save the gods, then you can't use The Sims.
Yeah,
that doesn't work like that. because you're sort of starting already from a very constrained style of storytelling.
Yeah, it's another example of the most effective outcomes being enabled by cutting out a huge swath of possibilities.
Yeah, but also those sorts of constraints exist because people are used to those constraints, to the sort of storytelling that happens in movies and books and things like that, where you can't have emergent stories happen, where you have to have very voiced characters, and I'm talking about books as well in that regard, very personality driven storytelling that doesn't happen inside of that happens in the page and not inside of the reader's mind. And that's just the nature of role-playing games. Obviously, I find it interesting that so many people cannot see the roleplay in The Sims. But I think once
that's the entire premise. It is a role-playing game ultimately.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
But once you sort of open your eyes to that and understand why it is a role-playing game, or why it can be, because not everybody's going to play it.
In my chaotic neutral ass a way of defining role-playing games or whatever the fuck, that's a role-playing game.
Yeah, for sure.
When I'm being annoying, I'm like, fucking Pathologic's a role-playing game, Dead Rising is a role-playing game, The Sims is a role-playing game, Final Fantasy's not a role-playing game. That's my insane approach. Where I'm like, well, are you making choices and playing a role and actually doing something, or are you just leveling up and following a story? Because those are different things.
Well, I think that also that exemplifies kind of the issue here, is that people look at The Sims, and The Sims is a game full of systems and storytelling and like emergent gameplay and like hard rules.
Yes.
99% of players who open The Sims immediately give themselves $4 million and then just build a house and then woohoo 47 times in the hot tub. Like that's all The Sims is to most people. Most people don't even realize how the game is supposed to be played. It's the same thing with, and I'm using this as like a kind of hot topic example, but like when Minecraft first launched, it was survival mode. Most people play creative. Like that's like or many people play creative, and that's how they view Minecraft.
I exclusively play survival still.
Same.
I like
I remember when I had to dig a hole in the ground and wait for the night to go
building
away.
Building a nightmarish inverted pyramid floating over an abyss pit that goes to the bottom of the world is only meaningful if I actually had to do it and mine it and build the resources correctly and create the like polished blocks and so on.
Yes. So that's why when we say things like The Sims is a storytelling role-playing game, people are like, what? No, it's not. And I'm like, actually, that's the only reason why you don't think that is because you have literally never played The Sims before, and because you think it's boring, because you think storytelling games are kind of boring.
Sims, they play The Sims like it's a porn game.
Yes,
exactly. I mean that very literally. Like there's there's a massive genre of porn games out there, both visual novels and just like ones that try to be mechanically driven, and a significant percentage of people playing them are clicking through everything as fast as possible to get to like the scenes, which is very funny when they try to play Echo that way. And they get very confused because they're clicking for 300,000 words.
Yes.
But anyway, this has been a good discussion, but it's definitely time to wrap things up. Speaking of all this tabletop discussion, go subscribe to Gnollplaying Games right now. Watch it.
Yes.
The most recent upload only has 200 views. Do it. Even if you watched Cape Escape before, there is a weekly upload called Idle Banter that is it's a bunch of the cut discussion that takes place before the game, in the intermission, in the middle of the game, and then the big, sometimes borderline full podcast that starts happening after the game, and I cut those into stuff. So there's a bunch of like bonus materials coming up on that channel every week between the two videos that are the game that week. And we'll have another game coming in January, so you gotta be subscribed or you'll miss it. I announce this stuff too often and talk about it too much because it's impossible to communicate anything to a YouTube audience because everyone sees a completely random sampling of what you upload. So that's why I have to repeat yourself a lot.
Indeed.
Wait,
and I'm sorry,
gay?
Andrew, that I steered this.
No, that's fine. I'm very used to the conversations here.
They are either Andrew-philic or Andrew-phobic conversations.
Yes.
Yes.
I'll see you guys next time. Bye.
Goodbye.